Hello and welcome to MoobTube, our second dispatch from the Berlinale. How are you holding up, Owen?
I am holding down my food barely. I think it's I think we're both feeling slightly.
We've been doing about 4 films a day.
Surreal place. Yeah, I think the
4
diet
films a day, 4 hours of sleep a night.
Less, I think. I think I had managed 3 yesterday and 2.5 hours the night before. So there's a kind of delirium that's set in. Not a sort of delirium tremens, but sort of a fugue state is probably a better way to put it.
I think it means that
we persist.
I think it means that when you see a good film, it sort of like blows you away, and when you see a bad film, it creates this extraordinary melancholy.
Yeah, like an impatience. I think the feeling of kind of great comfort laying over you when you're watching a perfect film.
It makes us seem like we're kind of got a sort of personality disorder.
Well, we have.
But I
have a
assure you,
about film.
I assure you, it's just lack of sleep, and probably numerous undiagnosed things. So just to give it
DSM chat,
just to give us exactly Dover Street Market. Let's give everyone a menu, a tasting menu. Inside by Vasilis Katsoupis.
Katsoupis.
It will be the first film we discuss. Then we'll go on to Ingeborg Bachman biopic, Journey into the Desert by Margarethe von Trotta. Passages by Ira Sachs, which I've seen.
And
Owen hasn't. Le Grand Chariot by Phillippe Garrel, which Owen has seen and I have not. Past Lives by Celine Song, which we both saw.
Seen, yeah.
Seneca by Robert Schwentke, which Owen has seen and I have not. Being in a Place by Luke Fowler, which I have seen and Owen has not. And rounding it all off with Disco Boy by Giacomo Abbruzzese, which we both watched last night.
And yeah, George has visited as well. George saw that, didn't he?
Yeah, but George isn't on this
George
pod,
is not with us at the moment.
Irrelevant information.
No, he's kind of in the expanded universe.
With
I
us
want people to imagine that he's with us.
We might invoke him. He's made some very great insights.
Yeah. Okay, so let's take it from top. What do you want to talk about first?
Inside, which we watched this morning.
Yeah. Okay, it's fresh in my memory. So this is a film. Actually, no, you introduce it because I have something to say beyond that.
So Willem Defoe. Bit of context for Willem Defoe. I mean, everyone knows who he is. He was in Platoon. He started off as a kind of performance artist in the, what was it called? The Worcester Group or something? Yeah. In New York, a performance group. There's a great video of him waving his willy around.
He has a notoriously large penis, apparently. It's a kind of well-held sort of factoid in Hollywood.
I mean, there's video evidence of it. It's not like some kind of sort of apocryphal
penis.
He's an interesting actor, a genuinely interesting actor, an actor who has some level of kind of
He's an enormous physical presence.
Yeah, extremely distinctive, and I think he is sort of, I guess, more intellectually committed to and involved in the projects than some actors are. This project is it's a film all set in one location, basically, the luxury flat of a collector who is never sort of seen properly in the diegesis of the film. He's away. He's a luxury art collector, a super rich art collector who is presumably an industrialist on a long business trip in Kazakhstan, and there is a team of art thieves, only one of whom is setting foot in the complex, the penthouse
burglar,
flat.
I think we call these people, don't we?
Yeah, a kind of cat burglar who's
intellectual kind of criminal mastermind, not a common thug, but a precision engineer. And
an intelligent, being an art thief, knows what things are worth, and has a kind of a personal attachment to works of art. So the setup, it's not a spoiler to say the setup, it all happens within the first 5 minutes. He's parachuted in. He's tasked with disabling the security system. He only has a certain amount of time in which to do that. It's unclear what exactly he's meant to do he
has to punch in a code.
He has to punch in some sort of code, but the code, it seems he doesn't type the code in time, or it's just something malfunctions. There's lots of ringing and flashing lights. And the whole apartment just locks down, and it becomes impossible for him to get out of this top of a skyscraper.
Yeah, it's like the
Penthouse
penthouse suite. Kind of like,
Exactly.
Goldfinger's, luxury condo on top of Trellick Tower.
Yeah, exactly. But this is
vibe,
like
but
even
much more excessive than that. 'Cause
even
it's,
bigger, very grand, and loads of rooms. Some rooms just for the art, secret passageways, and but it is not functioning because this collector is away and has been away.
It becomes
for
a
while.
locked box basically. So water is unavailable, and that becomes a kind of narrative pulse, the search and the preservation of water in an apartment. It means that plumbing fails, and what also happens so it's not so much that the system shuts down as it malfunctions, I think. So it means that the heating in this luxury condominium constantly kind of or like a wave swells between immense heat and
Like a sine wave going from
and cold
going
basically.
up to 40 and then down to sort of
Nothing really.
zero or whatever. I'm talking Celsius, but there's no Fahrenheit.
Yeah. It's an interesting film because it bears some perhaps unintended relationship with with reality. the Sydney Sweeney film, in terms of a chamber piece in a very literal way.
Revolving around one character.
Yeah, one character in one space, or largely one space. And I think it's interesting also that it had this kind of this red thread that kind of connected it with a very, very early Willem Defoe piece, which listeners may or may not be aware of, which is actually a James Benning and Burt Barr film called O Panama, in which Willem Defoe, who's then a very young man, kind of is in a feverish delirium of illness inside a blue apartment. And so for much of that short film, it's about 25 minutes or so,
Oh wow, I didn't know about this film.
variously see him. Yeah, it's an incredible piece of... It's Benning's only...
a good special feature for the Blu-ray of this.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, but it's Benning's only sort of conventional dramatic work in 40 years of making films. But the interesting about it is we see Willem Defoe go through various states of agitation, sickness, fever, and dreaming. There's dream sequences, and so that does kind of play a feverish role in this film as well. So I imagine Willem Defoe, and it might this is clearly it feels like a piece written for Willem Defoe, and I wonder that must have been in the mix in the water when
North on Evers, it's called.
What is?
Oh,
Panama is the film.
Oh, okay, sorry. There's another one he did called North on Evers, as you were.
Yeah, so I wonder if that was, part of it must have been in his mind doing this. And the difference between his body then, he was youthful, very young, very live. And here we see as much focus on his kind of wrinkled, slightly geriatric skin, his taut skin pulled over bones, the kind of the grotesqueness of a body that can't function properly because this apartment, which is supposed to be a place of immense luxury and ease and comfort, is becomes one of pain and torture almost, and madness. And so that is very much reflected in his body, because he speaks very little in this film, because there's no one to speak with. Yeah,
it's there is a connection to the outside world through this CCTV. I mean, there are sort of animals, like there's a fish tank and there's a pigeon sort of caught in the during the scuffle where the apartment locks down, and this pigeon is caught in the space between the glass and the netting, but somehow I'm not quite sure. But so there are these kind of creature comforts or discomforts that surround him. But there's this one connection to the rest of the apartment suite, which is dutifully vacuumed and concierged 24/7, and somehow through the TV he's able to a sort of flickering TV that's kind of suffered some water damage. He's able to watch these various members of staff going about their daily activities, and there's a particular woman that he develops this kind of beautifully realized cathexis, limerence obsession.
Limerence, that's probably
with this just like quite sort of conventionally attractive woman who just listens to her headphones and vacuums and smokes cigarettes
in the stairwell and
smokes cigarettes into the vacuum so it doesn't create smoke, all these things. Lovely details, and these provide punctuation. You would be surprised that a film of 110 minutes in running time, 1 hour 50, sustains such extraordinary tension. But it does, sustains such tension with the limit of only having one, presence in one location.
Well, it's a survival film, so it's in a way, it's got shades of Castaway, I suppose, in a way. And like any film like that, it's really a procedural film, and great emphasis is placed on, narrative momentum is built on just surviving and the ingenious ways he might survive. So a lot of his activity in the flat is it's a mixture of, I suppose, leisure, a kind of empty time, and also plotting an escape. So you've got this kind of Bressonian element, which is a man attempting to escape from prison for Bresson, but here, a man trying to escape this luxury penthouse, and he builds this enormous tower of all this very tasteful, expensive furniture. To try and reach these glass panels in the roof that will allow him to gain access to the outside, which is only going to be the top of the building.
What he does there, who knows?
Yeah, exactly.
But that's the only hope he has of getting out, it seems, or trying to attract somehow trying to attract attention.
Yeah.
But it's because it's a very expensive apartment. It's very well soundproofed. It's very secure. Because of this auto locking system, and the person who usually lives there, seems to be nowhere near returning. I think there's a moment where he looks through the guy's calendar and he sees that the guy's going to be away for
months and months and months. I think there's this interesting. There's the kind of silhouette of a nested critique of excess wealth. I suppose the idea of luxury being a trap, but it's there if I suppose you want to kind of push it, but it's in no way like kind of reified in the actual film itself.
I think it's worth invoking Triangle of Sadness at this point, because I think what we said about Triangle of Sadness when we watched it last year in New Horizons during our coverage of that festival, was that there were three phases of Triangle of Sadness. There's the kind of satire on the
fashion
world. Yeah. And on sort of manners in general, amongst the rich and wealthy. And then there's a second section, which is this like visceral, bringing the privileged, bringing out all these awkwardnesses in a new location, bringing together these people, putting them through a sort of physical
torment, like a Rabelaisian inversion. This
upturning. By Rabelaisian means upturning these.
Yeah, the carnivalesque, something that becomes exaggerated, excessive, gross,
with lots of shit and vomit and so on and so forth. And we liked that quite a lot, and we liked the opening to Triangle of Sadness a lot, and we really objected to the third chapter, which attempts to. That's the Rabelaisian thing. That's the upending of the hierarchy. And it feels at that point more didactic, and it's trying to sort of make some sort of point about human nature or whatever. At that point, I think Triangle of Sadness
became very clumsy by that point.
Becomes very clumsy,
perhaps.
And sort of tries to is thinking more about its audience's identity than thinking about its audience's like gut, heart and immediate reaction, immediate aesthetic instincts of the audience. And I think this film leans much more towards those immediate aesthetic instincts because it's quite formally well crafted. It as you say, it's a procedural film. It works very much with all these devices to do with trying to whittle bits of wood, trying to slide things through things, trying to set fire to things, to make things to get fire alarm
deconstructing the apartment in order to turn it against itself,
and each one of these attempts changes the space in a new way and creates this huge tension for us. Obviously we're rooting for him, obviously we want him to be able to get out of here, and yet the constantly watching this transformation and this not only the space become an artwork, well, it's already full of artworks, but then becomes a new artwork, and he creates these artworks. He also becomes an artist. He also does this rant about his daughter being fed chicken every day. I don't know if this is from
a childhood memory or
his performance art or something, but it felt very like Willem Defoe, really like deep digging into his own sort of depths.
But he also draws murals on the wall.
Yeah, exactly.
So that it becomes a kind of outsider or art brew installation within this house. Like you said, it kind of takes these tasteful pieces of speculatively bought blue chip art, as it were, and then creates a new composition out of them. And I think actually the interesting thing about in terms of the actual art that is within this apartment, I think there's a pointedness in the curation of it, and maybe if George had seen it and was here, we could probably talk more articulately about it. But my awareness is that the furniture and the design was not the obvious stuff, where you might expect like Marcel Breuer and people like that, and Gropius, and little pieces of furniture that are like conventionally associated with a great wealth. These pieces were a bit more anonymous. And the same goes for the art. Some of it was kind of recognizable, a lot of it wasn't. And the key thing was, typically with these films where we
Egon Schiele being the main.
Yeah, Egon Schiele, who's an unusual choice for the, you might expect it to be a Manet or a Pissarro or something, or a Goya as the kind of the choice artistic headpiece.
I mean, Schiele begins to represent or to foreshadow his emaciated physical state and his kind of like tortured.
Yeah, you're right.
state.
Actually, kind of that kind of veiny, bony, crackling nature of Schiele's nude portraits. And I think there's also some kind of there's like a kind of Viking burial hidden within the apartment through the secret chamber, where he believes it's a body at first, but it turns out it's a sort of a lifelike rubber effigy of a man laying on a slab in this very strangely lit room, which he then kind of squeezes and realizes it's not real.
So there will be moments like that which trigger a kind of a response from certain audiences. Kind of, I hesitate to call them Philistines. I'm not a huge fan of contemporary art myself. I've kind of run the gamut of that world as much as I want to
run through.
But there are, I do take art seriously, and obviously there are sort of little gags in this film that sort of some audiences will take as a kind of mockery of.
Yeah, it's more like the Square, Robert Rubenilson's Square in that
the
sense.
Excesses and which I mean, Ursula does that well in the Square, but like the the excesses and the kind of and the continuum between the conceptual excesses and like absurd monetary value, and the people who buy these things just being like
being absent, they are speculative assets, aren't they, rather than things to be aesthetically dwelt upon. And I think
so this does have a politics that is communicated sort of, and would probably be the first thing a lot of writers would write about in regards to this film.
Yeah, I think that's where you could invoke a kind of, I don't know, Heideggerian dwelling almost. He's actually the first body or subject to be in the world in this flat and to actually transform it around himself. So you could say, I think there's also some interesting elements where there's these kind of feverish dreams where he meets it's unclear whether he is dreaming of the art collector or has previously met him, and they might have some sort of relationship. But those
that's
are left
kept
quite
reassuringly ambiguous,
which I liked. But yeah, it's an extraordinary film. I think it's been one of the standout, and I think we saw it this morning very early, both being extraordinarily hungover, and it cast quite a powerful spell over both of us. I think.
I'm extremely reticent to invoke lived experience, as listeners of the pod will know, but we were death warmed up this morning. We had about 3 hours sleep maximum, and we'd sort of Margareta trotted out of our horrible Airbnb, moldy Airbnb apartment into this to the quite nice cinema in Potsdamer Platz, and we were just I had quite a visceral sort of feeling immediately as soon as the film began, and I was quite glad actually to watch something where I could just be carried by like my own flinching and sighing and hyperventilating. I'm glad that there are films that can do that to someone, but not in a shallow sort of.
It's not like
a horror film. It's not
Christian Bale in The Machinist or something. You know, it's not like a kind of grotesque torturing of the body. It's a very spiritually attuned film, I think.
It's it's a serious work, and it's wonderfully open actually as well. And the only reservations I had with it, unsurprisingly, were the moments where I felt it closed up a bit in terms of what all this meant. You know, because I think there's huge potential for it to mean a lot of things, and it's rare that you see a well executed. Not allegory, but I guess something that has allegorical potential that isn't kind of ramming something down your throat.
Yeah.
Because it is it's very Buñuelian, right? It's very this idea of like a space that someone cannot leave with these kind of absurd signifiers,
archetypal signifiers of enormous wealth and alienation. Because I guess the other pointed thing is that this man who's collected this great wealth does not even enjoy the fruits of his wealth, and the space itself is not really comfortable. It's very stark, it's concrete, it's grey, it's an oppressive space. So yeah, extraordinary film, but I don't know if we could really say too much more about it. So should we escape this penthouse and move to our next location?
Let's move to Ingeborg Bachman Journey. Let's move into the desert. Ingeborg Bachman Journey into the Desert. For those of you not familiar with the work of Margarethe von Trotta, she was a significant figure in the new German cinema of the 1970s. She collaborated with Volker Schlorndorff on The Lost Honor of Katharina Blum, and also she wrote. This was about sort of a film about a fugitive left-wing terrorist. She also did a film about two sisters, one of whom has flirtings with left-wing terrorism. This was the Red Army faction. This is a time when the left were not unafraid to commit acts of violence. And
the new German cinema is obsessed with
I mean Germany in Autumn is a great reference point, and
also Christian Petzold as well.
Of course, who we'll talk about later in the week. So von Trotta, and she has drifted in the last few decades into, I guess, prestige biopics of important cultural and political figures. Hannah Arendt. Is that the only one? Maybe I think she's done another one, but I'll just double check.
It's so interesting. I wasn't aware she'd made a Hannah Arendt film. I think I knew it had been made, but I hadn't connected von Trotta with this, and that makes so much interesting sense because Ingeborg Bachmann is, as a kind of literary and public intellectual, shares so many overlaps with Hannah Arendt as a figure, I suppose. And I mean, obviously, for those who aren't aware, Ingeborg Bachmann was a poet, also a novelist. I think we covered one of her adaptations, Malina, by Werner Schroeter, some years ago, maybe, or months or years ago, on this podcast. This film takes us to a particular juncture in Ingeborg Bachmann's life. So we don't look at her early relationship with Paul Celine. We see her marriage or relationship and the dissolution of the relationship with Max Frisch, so Swiss playwright Swiss playwright Max Frisch. And it's told in this tessellating, refracting series of deeply irritating flashbacks and flash forwards through these various through her kind of falling in love with Max Frisch, the disintegration of that relationship, and her other affairs of the heart and the body that kind of happen around that, and then this kind of return to this really evacuated chamois oriental rug of a section that's supposed to be in Egypt, I think, which is supposed to be a place of liberation or something. But the film itself, I found it's pure butter would melt in its mouth, prestige, middle of the road, bucking, bourgeois, middle brow kind of European art house. So everything is so exhaustingly beautifully composed. The costumes and the dresses are always exactingly correct. It is designed and shot within an inch of its life. So it wrings all the blood out of itself. It's such a. It is immediately. I mean, I said to you after the film, I was like, the problem with it is that in every scene, you immediately know how that scene wants you to feel, which is a closedness. It doesn't open itself out at all. And I think for me, Ingeborg, there's a tension that's not explored in Bachman's life and writing, in that she was there was a distrust of a language in her work.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of Wittgensteinian excavation of language to get to its kind of essence or truthiness.
Mm-hmm.
She was a perfectionist, would labour and work over her words and her language. She wasn't careless about it. So there is a precision, but there's also a chaos involved in that, an unleashing, and there was also a great chaos in her own life. And the film could really have articulated those tensions, but it's just so placid. It's just so nice, and it just rolls off the eye in the worst way possible. I don't know if I think we both share a distaste of this.
Well, this screening was very memorable because we were stuck, really trapped between a lot of people in a very tight row. Again, not to invoke one's viewing experience too heavily. We are, of course, objective, but we wanted to leave and we couldn't. It was sort of unbearably perfect in a way.
Yeah.
And if I were to have the fortune to meet, say the art director on it, or even the cinematographer, maybe I would congratulate them on a job well done. However, it is this film, kind of even the composer, the music. The music is actually it's deployed horrendously, but it is quite sort of beautiful, melodramatic, Glassian kind of.
These little
vistas,
swells of strings, vibrato and
and
tremolo, to know that there's a kind of a tension, or it's very programmatic use.
It is. This film is
music.
Obscenely less than the sum of its parts, and because it doesn't have anything to say, and it has completely against its own interest, focused on the aspect of a writer's life that is least interesting. These kind of like bitter, whimsical, dalliances or desires, or squabbling over how much noise someone's typewriter makes. A kind of a bit of bickering about whether one's work is influenced by the life of one's partner. There's a scene where Max Frisch gets annoyed that she's burnt her diaries, which he was using to as inspiration, and she says, you shouldn't be inspired by my life, whatever.
Justifiably so.
But it's all just like, so, I mean, it's not discourse in the sense of, it being about, BLM or something, but it is like, it functions in the same way as like, so like
she's a girl boss, isn't
yeah,
she?
it functions exactly. It functions in the same way. A lot of the lines are kind of dogmatically deployed references to a kind of discourse of feminism, of what is a woman's place in the world, how can a woman writer survive. I'm sure these are not insignificant factors, but they must, in a work of art, be presented in such a way that the audience can make their own way around what is actually true.
And this isn't a work of art. This is a front. It's Foyle's front table books. Chosen by the staff. It's a very. I think there's so little of her own writing and her own process and her methodology and her own poetics in this film. What it does show is it shows lots of her life as the public intellectual, giving readings, being given awards, speaking.
So it's a celeb biopic. It's like a film about Diana. I haven't seen it.
Yeah, you come away with no. If you were glancingly familiar with Ingmar Bachmann's work or not, it feels like they've created a film for those who. I don't understand why you'd want to go and see a film by a writer who you don't know who they are and haven't engaged with their work in any way, or their life in some sense. We're seeing it because we're at a film festival, and I don't know. I think there's a strangeness to that. You come away at the end of it not having any feeling for Bachmann's poetics or literary technique or anything like that. And I think it's just, for that reason, it's just such a shallow exercise and very self-congratulatory about this is an important film. This is a very important film. This is an important person. I
feel like I've walked in on German German, equivalent of the BBC, I suppose.
Yeah.
The sort of media establishment. I feel like I've walked in on the German media establishment, knocking out a quick one, and it's terribly embarrassing. And I just wish I'd shut the door sooner than I did. Because it's not for us to see, really. We are in Berlinale.
It's very embarrassing.
Trotta is an institution here, I'm sure, and I did.
And Bachman is as well in Germany. I mean, maybe,
and Bachman, and but two rights don't make a right, and
except in Germany where lots of rights keep making rights.
And rights. But
I think there's because there's I'm sorry to derail you. There's one thing I wanted to say now because I'm going to forget otherwise. And this is a sort of point that bears the relationship to Ingmar Bachmann. Also to many other films I've seen at the moment, there is this toe-curling trend of a lot of films at the moment to begin with black leader and then to have some diegetic sound that we don't see an object yet. And
every film.
A phone ringing,
almost every
a
film.
drink being poured, some just kind of maybe some rhubarb. And then the black slowly might either fade or jump cut to a scene. In this film it's the telephone, and it just seems to be it's such a lazy device of.
Well, in this film, it's a terrible dream sequence.
Drawing you in,
A dream sequence which is terrible.
I forgot about that. It was a dream sequence. Yeah,
it's terrible in a way that's different from the rest of the film, which is also terrible. No, it was quite hard to figure out afterwards just why I detested it so much, because it was hard to take issue individually with.
Because it was too perfect.
As I say, the various bits that were. But it was perfect in service of nothing. And therefore, its perfectionism bristled. And I just felt like I was watching an extended perfume advert.
It felt like a fashion editorial
with more sadness.
Because in a way, like it's obviously sipping from the cup of Phantom Thread, where Phantom Thread is a period drama that really is very muscular and weird and unsettling. And I think this was trying to go for a similar kind of structure of feeling and ambience. But I think, it's Paul Thomas Anderson's greatest film probably, and he has a great ability to evoke that weirdness in Phantom Thread. But this film had none of that, because the characters were very wooden. They felt like you didn't feel like you were watching a fleshy live person. You felt like you were watching a mannequin of that famous person. It's like, Absolutely. This is Max Frisch, the character, Max Frisch, the writer. This is so and so. This is so and so. Everyone was very instrumental, and I just didn't like it. It was really weak.
Just a footnote: she also made I wasn't making up about the multiple biopics of important with German women. She also did Rosa Luxemburg.
She did Rosa.
This was in the 80s.
Yeah, public.
But Barbara Sokoa played Rosa Luxemburg and Hannah Arendt.
That's interesting. It's cottage industry, this.
It is. She did start, in the New German Cinema era, and she's certainly not the only New German Cinema director to completely fall off after the 70s. Yeah. And I think in some ways these films owe more to their, the editors and the cinematographers than they do the directors in some cases. But The Lost Honor of Katharina Blum and The Second Awakening of Christa Klagers.
It's such a German...
They're very taut thrillers. They're very fun.
It's a very German thing to have a person's name in a film.
And then I think around Marianne and Julianne, which I've also seen, she sort of falls apart a bit because she's trying to solve a political quandary in her head. And the only people who's, like Germany in Autumn, actually, which she wasn't involved with, weirdly. This was
a boys' club
portmanteau film, portmanteau film by the New German Cinema people about 1979,
but officiated over by Alexander Kluge.
Yeah, and with the involvement of Fassbinder scratching his balls, which I think is the only reasonable response to political violence and the struggle to liberate whilst using tools of violence.
So there's not really much more you can say about it. It's just very, very by the by. It was it's just toothless, I think, for me. And
one other thing I want to say, and you might have stuff to chime in on this. We're not saying, we sort of slightly are saying, you shouldn't do films about living people who made art, biopics of artists. There are exceptions, like Edvard Munch, which is a very innovative, like mock documentary, a very long form, innovative mock documentary, much like Peter Watkins' other work, which is British as well, using this patrician British voiceover to convey the life of an artist rather than giving them a voice.
Yeah.
This is an amazing achievement, I feel.
Peter Greenaway is also, if not
Greenaway,
excellent, he's interesting at least as a biopicker.
I made this realization that actually it's one thing the British have a bit of a firm foot forward on, is biopics of artists. Ken Russell, Derek Jarman, and Peter Greenaway, as you say, and Peter Watkins, most notably, have managed to crack using a kind of a formal disruptions, destabilizing a kind of an authoritative voice.
You're right. Yeah,
they've managed to convey the lives of artists really well. The only other one I can think of is Andrei Rublev by Tarkovsky, which isn't really a film about the artist Andrei Rublev.
I think
it's about the time he lived in.
The Georgians and Armenians have a taste for it as well. I think both Parajanov
of course,
Georgi Shangalaya both made biopics, as it were, of Pirosmani.
True.
Which are both in their own ways really excellent films. But
you
I think,
almost forget that they're about the artist. Is that what you're going to say? Sorry.
I think you forget, because what you're seeing is a work it's a response to the life and the work of that person, and like you said, it might disrupt or disfigure, and it meets greatness with its own attempt at greatness. I think, and says, okay, well, I think actually Greenaway's Eisenstein in Guadalajara, which is a later Greenaway, it's not perfect. It might not even be great or good, but it's certainly a really interesting engagement with, like, how do you make a film about Eisenstein in Mexico and his years in the desert, literally. And I think it meets it with this real kind of postmodern absurdity, which I think he also did, with the Rembrandt as well. And because it engages with the fact that it's not just an artist you're looking at, but the art they've made. And in this film, it's like Ingeborg Bachman could just be some woman.
Exactly, and I think that anonymity, that lack of sort of footnoting, would be the way to go. And I think that leads us nicely. Well, because I was thinking also about because there was this Fassbinder biopic that obviously none of us saw, but
the Peter von
no,
Rebel with a Cause or whatever.
That one, the one that was about his life, and it was just loads of people dressing up as the people in the films. Obviously bad. We didn't see it. We didn't need to see it to know it was bad.
Enfant terrible, I think it was called.
Enfant terrible, that was it.
Yeah, got it.
And these films just exist to create some kind of discourse, and they exist so that people buy tickets, thinking of the person the film is about. A film which kind of almost would work quite well as a biopic of someone, although the character is fictional and it's not formatted like a biopic at all, is Passages by Ira Sachs. Now, I'm going to go on a slight monologue, but free for
I didn't see it, but I can kind of nudge you. Here
please do nudge if I go off course or go over long. But yes, it's the hardest ticket to get in town right now. Passages by Ira Sachs. I haven't seen his work before. I think his films. It seems from the conversations I've had, I've heard of him. It seems these films have mostly existed on the kind of queer circuit or the circuit of lesbian and gay films. And this one, for whatever reason, seems to be breaking out. Perhaps because, in a sense, the theme of the film is breaking out. It is a film about a love triangle where a homosexual relationship is destabilized by a heterosexual affair, a heterosexual obsession, which the character of the protagonist, the film director protagonist, Thomas, develops with Adele, like Sarkopoulos's character Agathe, and usurping Ben Whishaw, his husband, who he lives with in the film. So these three performances, I'm not usually crazy about Ben Whishaw. He's great in Nathan Barley. I think sometimes his performances feel a bit like Tilda Swinton, a bit sort of staid or forced. But I think every so often he's cast in a role which really, as with Tilda in The Souvenir, like leverages that kind of that mode. Maybe it's something to do with British actors. He in this kind of opposites attract dynamic that he has with the character of Thomas, played by Franz Rogowski, who I had a very amusing encounter with at the press conference. He complimented me on my ears, which
I've got the tape, mate. That's this is very funny. So you won't hear Ralph's question this, but you will. You asked a question about scripting and casting.
Different. That's what I'm always like. Isn't that how? I mean, a lot of people.
Ira Sachs.
I would say.
Yes, I have to say something else. I was wondering if it's appropriate, but I have to tell you, you have amazing ears. They are very beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Really nice ears. I think our improvisation.
The thing that makes this clip even better.
Then you're already riding high on this.
No, but the thing that sort of enhanced it for me in the moment, and it's not the most interesting thing was the answer he gave, which I loved, but and the answer Ira Sachs gave. But the thing that enhanced it is that he like so many actors we've seen at the press conferences, he's very similar. He's in at least in maybe not in deed, but in tone. He's very, very similar to his character in the film. And his character in the film is absolutely mercurial. He is somewhat Fassbenderian, this kind of animal-like filmmaker, and I mean animal-like in the sense that whatever he's feeling in the moment, he totally embodies, and has a way of completely deserting that feeling later on when it's no longer useful or relevant. This leads him to behave in ways that viewers might find extraordinary, or selfish, or hurtful or cruel. But his performance doesn't elicit judgment. There was a question at the press conference about how a slightly discoursey question about how the parents behave in a very intolerant. The parents of the woman behave in a very intolerant way when they meet this guy who's dating their daughter. And Ira Sachs, I was very relieved to hear Ira Sachs say that he didn't actually think or intend this scene to cast those parents in a negative light. And then he proceeded to articulate a casting and improvisation and a non-rehearsal process, which was basically sort of like, without wishing to sort of get too indulgent, it was sort of basically like therapy, and this was echoed by Rogowski, saying that he felt very seen and cared for in a way that he doesn't always in films. So clearly Sachs is incredibly good at working with actors, but working with actors isn't enough to make a great film. Luckily, Ira Sachs also is incredible at composition in this film, and possibly in his others. I haven't seen them. The compositions and the way that bodies are depicted, even the sound, the way that light moves. The palette is somewhat similar to Me at Hanson Love, and some of the sensitivities that echo, things I liked about One Fine Morning, which I recently saw, and I think we should probably do a pod on her soon. But it had a bit more oomph, reflecting the vivacity of the characters, and just an extraordinarily energetic, devastating love triangle. I mean, I was saying when after the Emily Atef, I was saying a bad love triangle film makes you think it's a completely tired and predictable format, but a good one makes you feel that each time these timeless stories can be imbued with new energy and context and detail, and that we don't need any novelty beyond that. Yes, I was restored to the more correct, optimistic position by this really fearsome work. It was astonishing. I think probably judging by, and this is not denigrating it, but I think judging by the standard of contemporary filmmaking, this is way ahead as best film of the year, unless I see something.
That's an incredible claim.
Unless
I'm really
I see something really great. Maybe
it's sold out so quickly.
Sold out very quickly. Genuinely word of mouth, functioning as it should here. But they didn't put on enough screenings of it. I don't know why they undersold it.
But obviously, when it goes into theatres, as they say, I think this is a definite Muub tube recommendation.
Absolutely, and it will be on Mubi.
It will, actually.
It's been acquired by them, so it won't make much money, unfortunately.
Well, it was for me, because I found out recently that I'm actually paying 2 subscriptions at once.
No, really?
So I've been paying double bubble to Mubi for the last few months accidentally.
That is an absolute disgrace. But you're propping up, you're keeping alive films.
I like to think of myself as a philanthropist.
I'll be really happy if Passages is like their worst person of the world of this year. I will feel like genuinely, because I think it will do well, and I think it is. It's
an English language film, this one.
It's everyone speaks different languages. It's got Well, it's French and English basically, but
Yeah.
yeah. His character is German. He's a German actor, German Polish, I guess. And then Adele is French, and what's his job? Ben Brishaw is of course painfully English. But let me just look at my notes quickly. In case I
if you've
said
got any
anything
more
else.
to say. I mean, so how can you give me a? I like to have these little linkages. So can you give me something that it feels like or looks like to you? What's an equivalent film that you've seen from the archive? Or does it really stand alone in a way?
No, it is. I would refer back to One Fine Morning. I would also refer to Fassbinder as director. I think his work deals in a very unsentimental but very moving way.
Is it something like Holy Whore or Fox and Friends, that kind of?
Yeah, Fox and Friends, especially just because of this similarity between Fassbinder's own character and Rogowski's character. Maybe Cassavetes as well to an extent.
Ooh,
because there is a sort of they were a bit ambiguous in the press conference about how they use improvisation, but there's definitely actor work happening, and it really matters who plays who, you know. But some of the lines are just so devastating, and it's just done. Even bits of it are sort of Bressonian, the way bodies move around. It's a real proper.
It's a film.
It's a
like
proper art house banger. Yeah, and it's really and it's like sexy and it's devastating and then these kind of moments. The music is also really restrained. After a week of like incredibly excessive saccharine music, we finally found a bit of actual genuine restraint with this sort of jazz music that's deployed towards the end. I won't tell you what scene it's used in, but
I think it's exciting to see the deployment of musical cue or music in general in a film that is not leaning on this Phillippe glass light.
And not leaning on the rhythm of, oh my God, you're breaking up with me.
Yeah.
You know, like
it's almost like the sentimental, golden age of Hays Code era Hollywood, because it's like dream sequence, here's a harp, or it's very programmatic and destructive uses of music. And I think one of the things I've always loved, and I'm sure Ralph would agree with this with Godard, is actually Godard's disruptive, disjunctive use of music. And he uses classical music, he'll use Bach and whatever, but he does it in such a way that kind of fits jarringly over into the body of the film in that kind of Bressonian way, that the image and the sound should be working at a counterpoint to each other.
Yes, which absolutely happens in several instances. And also there's an that you don't actually find out. Two of the main characters, you don't really find out what their job is.
I love that
until you do, but it's like loads of plot and establishment happens. Act 1 kind of hurtles along. And then I think it's like half an hour, maybe even 40 minutes in. I wasn't counting the clock at all because I was so wrapped. But it does, it's like really funny. You suddenly see them in their workplaces.
That's interesting.
Like halfway through almost. It's just very interesting, but very like...
They're podcasters, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. they present a podcast about cultural...
Nerd.
Anyway. So
okay,
next.
we're talking about Rogowski. Let's go to another film we saw, which is Disco Boy by Giacomo Abbruzzese, who's an Italian filmmaker. This is his debut film. He's made his debut feature, I should say, dramatic feature. So he's made shorts, maybe as many as 8 or so shorts and documentaries. I've seen one of those, which is Fame, which I really immensely dislike. Sort of graffiti doc, basically, or street art doc, whatever you want to call it. I like to think of it as defacing public monuments, but but this Disco Boy basically is a sort of Pilgrim's Progress style film. It's a journey of a man to join the Foreign Legion. His kind of hazing and training within the environment of the Foreign Legion, obviously Claire Denis, Beau Travail, a klaxon there, and Beau Geste as well, obviously, like the Foreign Legion film, and then a journey into Nigeria and a military confrontation, and then this kind of the aftermath of this. Again, like Rogowski is the best thing about this film in a lot of ways, because he plays a largely silent, very physically intense man driven by we don't know his motivations why he's joining the
but he starts off as a sort of he's just on he's just visiting Poland with a bunch of other Belarusians.
But that's a ruse. It's a Belarus.
And then it's a Belarus. It's a great Belarus. And then of course he slips off with a friend who tragically dies on the way. And he makes it to France. And of course he has nothing. So the only way to stay in France is to join the French Foreign Legion.
Yeah, and to gain the green card or whatever you get as a result. So this film obviously Beau Travail's in the water with it. It competently pays homage to Claire Denis' work in a sense of the training sequences. I think in some of the military encounters in it are.
It's a Pinterest board of a film, really.
Yeah,
it's a Miro board. It's a Trello board. It's all the boards.
Yeah, because it's got this kind of unusual.
And we were during it. No, we weren't. Actually. It was quite entertaining.
I didn't love it at all. I thought it was okay. Certain parts it really irritated me. The final act I found really distasteful. God-awful slop of an act, because what happens is he goes to Nigeria and Abbruzzese spends a long time setting up this kind of rebel group that they're going to engage with on Niger Delta. We're introduced to these characters and this village life, and you think, okay, so the film's now just going to be set in Nigeria, and we're going to have this kind of high-end war film. You get a bit that bit's actually over really quickly, and they dispatch with it. He kills some guy who's this rebel chief,
who has one eye a different color from the other.
Yeah, and then whose dream actually is to go to Europe to dance in a nightclub, basically.
He's known as Disco Boy.
Disco Boy. So what
and I guess Rogowski's character sort of takes his place in a way and tries to seduce his sister.
It gets really messy. So he kills this guy.
She's an asylum. She's an asylum seeker who then moves to Paris and becomes a kind of
dancer in a club that he frequents, and they have this kind of this really shite kind of ransacking of the final dance scene in Beau Travail, like one of the most beautiful dance scenes in film history. Really powerfully taught explosion of sublimated sexual and willful energy at the end of Beau Travail. And what you get here is this consistent, it keeps happening, this kind of dance.
The problem is that when something is good in a very distinctive way, it gets on everyone's radar in a sort of then everyone then it becomes a formula. When Claire Denis did that, it felt very specific, and it was weirdly just like you ended up thinking about the music, the rhythm of the night, this Corona track. Levant, obviously, across his career, he has been like a physical performer in
much
lots of ways.
Tusky.
Yeah. There's similarities. Sort of, I would file them in the same category. Rogowski, Kinski, Klaus Kinski, Fassbinder himself, and Levant. These kind of clown, sort of diminutive clown-like animal presences. He's a great performer. He's basically the best thing about it. The other best thing about it is this thermal cam battle sequence in the water, which is like extremely tense and very entertaining. There's a sort of platoon tribute helicopter liftoff war thing. There's a Vice News bit that's a bit corny. It's a very inconsistent film that's basically an amalgamation of lots of different, as I say, reference points on a mood board.
Yeah, because you've got your Richard Moss visuals, even with the kind of night vision cam. Obviously, Richard Moss is a photographer, but it's literally sucking the juice out of Richard Moss. And I think but those combat scenes are amazing. They're disorienting. He actually uses the night vision in a much more imaginative way than Richard Moss, who I think is a very middling photographer. Which is because we're very up close to these tussling bodies. The kind of infrared or the kind of red and blue kind of flares out, so you get this kind of texture flicker effect, much like a kind of Brackagian digital brackage, basically.
Yeah, totally. It feels like it's a moment where you're like, and I don't need this in every film I see, but I love it when I do see it. There's a bit where you're like, this is a new image. This is a new kind of. This is a thing, a very cinematic button being pushed in it with a texture and a visual and an
energy. We've not seen that before. We've not seen in an independent film of this scale. We've seen plenty of it in Stom Sogo, for example.
Yeah, but we haven't seen a battle. We haven't seen a battle scene done like we haven't seen a battle scene that you're desperately following to try and find out what happens, presented in a way that goes into abstraction, not in some like corny sort of Saving Private Ryan like high shutter speed thing, but like in a genuinely like in a way that conveys the fog of war, that conveys the sort of sensory confusion while also using a device. I thought it was like so inspired, and I was I was so let down by how I mean, it's often the case that we watch things and there's something sort of stylistically a bit interesting that isn't like, even like the After Sun, the camcorder doesn't last long enough or whatever. But like in this case, it was just so well deployed, and then the rest of the film fell far below it.
Yeah, it felt like it was a victim of maybe a constrained budget. And that sustained. So the actual film was shot in Portugal. I suppose there was limited landscape in Portugal that would reflect the Niger Delta. So maybe they felt like
it was pretty impressive. They made it feel like Africa.
There's a lot of CGI, which is fine. I mean, it was kind of tastefully done. But yeah, I was anticipating this kind of Apocalypse Now journey into the heart of darkness vibe, with the end of the film. Instead, we get this kind of story about redemption and
and
PTSD
it's sort of
and
cheap, unearned colonial sort of question mark on all this stuff, isn't there?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it was. It's interesting that he interviewed JR. In Fame, his documentary about street art.
Oh, it's about the guy that the guy was abusing, sort of dragging her around.
Yeah, and I think there's a kind of JR-ness about it. It's kind of cringeness to it. So on the base cringe continuum, it really pumps. It's quite cringe, quite churgy ambience towards the end. So yeah, I think. But Rutowski, but he still kind of simmers with this kind of blunt physicality, and it's amazing how him going to this nightclub, refusing to dance with this woman, so he just sits at the bar and goes Bordeaux. He wants to drink Bordeaux.
The actor's really having a great Berlinale, I have to say. Yeah. I didn't think I'd come back from.
Glugs it down.
I didn't think I'd go to Berlinale and say that the most impressive people were Americans and actors, but that's where it's at.
Filmmakers' paradise at the moment.
What is there anything else to say about? I don't know if it'll do well, but it doesn't really deserve to. But it's also watchable in a certain sense. I think we should do a little, sort of not totally quick fire exactly, but like fairly rapid run through some films that only one of us have seen. I did watch the first 20 minutes before I went to this exciting press conference with the cast of Passages. I did sit through a little bit of Le Grand Chariot, the Plough by Phillippe Garrel. But since I didn't see it all, I'll let you tell all.
Yeah, so something we've said about, obviously Garrel's Le Révélateur, what is an explosive, miasmic strangulation of a film. It's an amazing thing. It's an amazing document, or I suppose of rebellion and angst from the 60s. But he has subsequently become he kind of René'd himself in a way, the way that René often ended up making quite middling films.
Oh God, René's last films are
these quite trifling little minor works.
Yeah.
And I think there's this sense the drop off in French filmmakers in that sense. So what we get with this film, it explores the kind of tragedies and destinies and lives of this family and kind of expanded family of puppeteers. Which is in theory quite interesting. It's not something I've necessarily seen on film before or anything. I found it very cold-blooded in a lot of ways. So I think it's got shades of Roma because it's these kind of crisscrossing romantic relationships, and the characters are often unable to really explicate or articulate their desiring, and it often leads to sort of misunderstandings and switch arounds. People change partner a couple of times. They struggle to assert themselves in the way that they want to, because this puppet business is really a real drag for a lot of them in a way. It's orchestrated by the father who dies, this kind of charismatic father who dies, and then they have to kind of decide what they want with this thing they've inherited, and it means they kind of fragment in their own different ways. But whereas Roma is perfect at presenting us with kind of mercurially irritating characters whose irritations make them very, very, for the most part, I think it's not always the case, but for the most part make them really, really likable and interesting. Whereas these characters were just kind of annoying and and an irritant, particularly one of the young men who has a dalliance with a woman in the film, who for the 90% of the film, I thought it was one of the other women. I didn't realise these were two separate women. And it was only a little bit later, after a lot, kind of like squinting at the screen, I realised it was an entirely different woman. And that wasn't like an intentional kind of disruptive effect. It was just that he cast 3 almost identical looking brunette women.
It's funny, like when you're like obviously like even like, you know, we like, what am I saying? You know,
yeah,
they all look the same. You know, it's like we can't like tell a bunch of white people apart. Like it's like you as a director, you never really think like, oh, I should make sure I don't cast people who look the same, because in your head you're like working with these people every day. You obviously assume they're
fully fleshed out
differentiation.
Characters.
But actually, loads of people look quite similar to each other, and it's that you do actually need, as well as costume, you do need to sort of, just on an aesthetic level, you need a kind of distinguishment, I feel.
Yeah, or even just, it says a lot, it speaks a lot about the kind of flatness of the script, I think, in a way that these two women they merged for me, because they weren't distinct enough.
And were they meant to merge in an interesting way? Usually not, right?
No, and I think, so yeah, I mean, it was, it was nicely shot, and I think there was a certain charm to it, I think, so I didn't find it terrible, I just found it okay, but I found it quite a little bit bloodless for what it was trying to do. I think it kind of saves itself a little bit in the final 20 minutes, where one of the men, who's sort of like an apprentice to the family, sort of decides to pursue painting and struggles to create, because he doesn't want to compromise his work by distributing it through a gallery, and kind of rejects. It's a great scene where he kind of rejects a potential buyer who wants to buy some paintings, but they're not finished, so he kind of sends this guy away, and then kind of has this mental breakdown. He slashes all his paintings in the metro, which is great, and then gets committed to an asylum. Like and it's very good, because it's like he's not like, it's not hysterical madness, and he's in this kind of sort of slightly unusual bliss state almost in this asylum, and those scenes are very nice at the end, and they have a kind of Mia Hansen love kind of quality about them. What I will say, he's
circling that sort of thing, isn't he? But he doesn't quite find
land. Does it?
The real distinctive Phillippe Garrel was in the 60s and 70s, and he hasn't found he's changed so radically, and he hasn't found a voice in this new.
No, I just want to point out what is going on with films about fucking dementia at the moment, because the granny in this film also gets dementia. It's just everyone seems to be fucking pulling.
I didn't like. Board. I have to say, I don't want to cast too many opinions about this film because I haven't seen it really. But the scenes I did see at the beginning, where she's like asking them about they've been doing Extinction Rebellion protest or something, and she's like, "Oh, is it all right? Is it okay? You're safe?" You know, she's like, check, and it's just like. It's just a bit.
Well, that's kind of Garrel, because
like sure that conversation probably happens a lot, but like, why are we being shown it? What is it? What is it?
Well, because I suppose Garrel like created a powerful, enigmatic response to '68 in his early work, and now he's like, oh well, I used to be a proper rebel. I was, Yeah,
so it does feel really boomerist.
Yeah, it's very boomery.
It feels like someone who just like got property and just stops caring about anything.
So
he said everything he needed to say about the family in Le Révélateur, which is a completely wordless experimental film where a kind of anxious
couple and a child
sort of circle each other.
But this, it was charming enough.
I don't know why he doesn't know that.
I don't know. It was charming enough, but it felt like a very minor work, and it hasn't really lingered with me, despite it was felt like a little bit of an effort to kind of chew through this particular play of Green's, I think.
Ghastly. I will now proceed to articulate my, in this case, grievances. With Luke Fowler's.
Yeah, I wasn't here for this one.
Luke Fowler's Being in a Place, which was funded. So there's this cottage industry in Glasgow. Margaret Tait, who I believe probably lived in a cottage, I imagine. She also lived in Rome briefly. But Margaret Tait is an experimental filmmaker from Orkney, so really, really Scotland, above Scotland. And she's a well-loved, I would say kind of overrated, but experimental filmmaker who is a sort of a bit of an icon up there. When I lived in I lived in Glasgow for a month a few years ago, and I think it was around the time of the centenary of Margaret Tait where a lot of these films were being funded, like this, that were sort of tributes or proposals for tributes to Tait. It does just feel a bit like when you go to a small town that has like one famous artist comes from it, and that's all anyone ever talks about. It's a
bit like Macintosh in the Glasgow as well.
Exactly,
kind of
it's just tragic, really. It's because a lot of the most exciting people basically lived in cities. You don't see the cities.
John Berger lived in the Parsi. Some interesting people live in the countryside.
Of course, but
probably, maybe.
But it's anyway. This is kind of discourse because basically it's not as well made as it could be. I say this as a fan of Luke Fowler's early work. I like his sort of 3-minute wonder shorts that he made for Channel 4 back in the day that were just kind of shots of his bedroom and his room and the streets on 16mm. I mean, he's obviously a 16mm file. He likes them.
Because he's very 16. Much involved in this. He's very much involved. As a parody, do not sue us. There's because he's kind of interested in archives and conservation of film and analog film stocks. I think that's his whole métier, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think his greatest work is All Our Divided Selves, which is a documentary about R.D. Laing, the sort of anti-psychiatrist. This film is sort of meant to be an attempt to execute a proposal for a film set in Orkney that she had proposed to make with Channel 4, and she'd been kind of led along a bit and then eventually sort of brusquely thrown off by the producers. This is the letters that are between her and the producer or the commissioning editor are posted on screen in a pretty pathetic attempt to make us feel kind of mournful and
that's a bit depressing
and sad, about. I mean, it's like, would it have been that good a film? Was this a particularly good film? I think Scotland really needs to get its, the Scottish art scene really needs to get its head out of its own arse. It's kind of pathetic, just constantly trailing after this old biddy whose work is just not, it's nowhere near the level of Brett Brackage. Or even really Murray Menken.
There's work that's come out of the London Filmmakers Co-op and stuff that is perhaps more worthy of a kind of this laudatory.
And maybe they need, because she's a woman or whatever, maybe they need that as an in to get funding to do experimental films. Can experimental films need to be done? Not all of them need to be done on 16mm, but sure, we can have that. I was disappointed because I think Luke Fowler has a feel for the materiality of film and deploys it in the modern era really well. I like seeing phones and magazines and the things I don't usually see on 16mm in his lens.
You're right about that. There's a kind of excitement to seeing the modern shot on film or analog, and it kind of, we keep invoking Bresson at the moment, or I do, but it's about Bresson saying that the powerful work of art kind of detaches something from its context and puts it in a new light, and I think it does that. He's done it very well. I think actually he's kind of interested in these figures. I mean, his film about Cornelius Cardew, the English composer, or specifically about his scratch orchestra, is really good. But maybe the subject matter is more interesting, because Cornelius Cardew is a super influential avant-garde composer.
I think also these films, I haven't seen the Cardew one, but the R.D. Laing one certainly. I saw the R.D. Laing film when I was very young. It was when it was the Turner Prize, and they showed it in full again, like sort of across the day. And I didn't know who R.D. Laing was at that point. And it was my introduction to R.D. Laing. And some might expect that a better introduction to R.D. Laing would be a conventional sort of BBC arena documentary or whatever. But no, actually, the best intro I could have had to R.D. Laing's fascinating, corpus of work. And project was this extraordinary experimental film by a great filmmaker, which sort of linked together archive and all this stuff. I'm into it, but I support the project. But in the case of the Margaret Tait film, he doesn't really allow anyone to learn anything new about Margaret Tait. It mainly seems to serve the kind of existing audience of people who somehow aren't sick of hearing about this overrated parochial
I think
artist.
we've kind of touched on a point here. There's there's a line here we said about British or UK filmmaking and biopics and treatments of lives of the artist. I think this is all part of the same thing. So it's in a way it's one of British filmmaking's greatest strengths and also one of its greatest weaknesses. And I think it's often towards the more literary and kind of highbrow that it kind of comes to grief. People like, sort of thinking about Grant G's Patience.
The Sebald film,
yeah, which is a really indulgent and kind of unhelpful unpicking of a book that has been so dragged, so
just nostalgism, I guess, fetish.
Yeah, but I think it's just certain books. Like I think people are so relieved that a book like The Rings of Saturn was written, but it's written by a bloody German man. It's written from a German post-war existential perspective. It's got really nothing to do with the English landscape whatsoever. So I feel like this harking, like this kind of attachment, this kind of attachment mode to certain works of art and artists in the UK is pretty obnoxious. Sometimes.
There is a funny bit at the end of this Margaret Tait film where there's a recording of an interview with her where she says that there are no good British films.
Amazing.
She's sort of listing all her favourite filmmakers and stuff, and then she says that the British ones are all she says the British don't have an eye for poetry.
I agree with that. Yeah.
But I don't really think Margaret Tait does either.
No. Physician heal thyself.
Yeah. So I'll take that. I'll take that statement. When Godard piles off British cinema, I'll hold my hands up and say, okay, you're allowed that because you have made some of the greatest films of all time. But from Scottish soil, I give it short shrift because there are filmmakers as we mentioned earlier with regards to biopics, there are British filmmakers who do have a sense of poetry, but they approach it in a unique way. And if you're not prepared to sort of articulate what that route is, everyone can access that poetry. Every nation, every person.
Okay, Jeremy Corbyn. There's a poem in everyone.
No, I mean there isn't a poem in everyone.
No, definitely not.
The material circumstances do consign us, unfortunately.
Cut me open and you will see no poems.
You've published many, but I do. I think it's just a facile statement that got a ripple from the audience, but it just
who is that serving?
It just underlined what a kind of like pathetic piece of nostalgism this film was. Let's move on to a film that you've seen that I've not seen, Seneca by Robert Schwentke.
Yeah,
I have nothing to say about
I'll
this.
skip over this. It was a very stupid film. So Robert Schwentke in 2017 released or shot Der Hauptmann, Captain, which maybe viewers might have seen. I think it had limited theatrical distribution, but was on Netflix, was acquired by Netflix. It lived a kind of like sputtering second life. It was I guess there's a bit of a lineage here. So that was really a kind of knockoff of The Painted Bird, which in turn was a knockoff of Klimov's Come and See. And
which is the only actually good film in that list of films.
Yes, yeah, they get increasingly bad the further away from Come and See you get. But it was stylistically kind of interesting, The Hauptmann. I thought so. I was kind of thought, okay, and the material of this film. So Seneca, obviously by the name, is basically a biopic of Seneca, so Roman statesman, Stoic philosopher. Seneca, tutor to Nero, and he really deals with his last day. He was notoriously instructed by Nero to kill himself. And it focuses on that situation. So reading that, it's so my jam for what a really interesting concept for a film could be, conceit. But the execution is really slapdash. It's a really stupid film. John Malkovich plays Seneca, and he plays him brilliantly because it's a great role for John Malkovich. This kind of wheedling, pathetic, bombastic orator, which is what Malkovich does really, really well. But despite all his rage, it's still just a shit on a page. But it's such a stupid film. It's shot in this really kind of art, this very kind of theatre. It's like a theatre play, really, because it's shot mostly in one sort of very stagey location, and this kind of ruined but also quite modernized Roman villa that's kind of it's disintegrating, but also has like modernist kind of infill on it, which is annoying. So there's all these kind of like basically the thing that really annoyed me about this film was where it's kind of weak source postmodern references to other texts laying outside of itself, and it's kind of modernization of it. So Emperor Nero, who's this big bad boy, wears sunglasses and has got a mum tattoo, which is awful. Sort of attempt, it's so cringe.
How does one formulate a kind of as a proper critique of this attempt to modernize? I remember, when you're in school, you do English literature. They do. They'll show you these dramas that have Shakespeare's.
You'll do Romeo and Juliet.
Textual adaptations of Shakespeare that have an iPod in the background. I
was like, yes, it's relevant to our lives today.
What is this thing? What is this conceit? Because we all know it's bullshit. We all think it's stupid
as well.
This idea that you need that the content or the context of something is the thing that makes it powerful.
Yeah. I don't know. This is the thing. So this is a very ideological film. It's a very discursive film in that sense. So discursive film, sorry, I should say. Because it wants to make it abundantly clear that this is really about modern fascism and about modern world leaders, and it's about Trump, and it's about orators.
Everyone, take note.
Yeah, it's about the alt-right. It's about, so one of the interesting things, and it even though that would be so imminent in the film anyway, without needing to be articulated, Schwentke wants to make it super clear. So rather than calling Nero emperor, everyone refers to him as President Nero, Mr. President, they call him, which is just this horrible clanging kind of modernization that's dropped into the film. It's really awful. There's lots of kind of self-serving winks to the audience. And then at the end, when Seneca has this insane rant, bombastic rant, there is it's intercut with found footage of climate crisis and emergency. So sea levels rising, storms, wildfires, all of this stuff, oil rigs and things like that. Because again, it wants to really, really let us know in the most dogmatic way possible that this is about now. It's a classic case of show don't tell, and it's telling us what it's telling us what it's doing. Very cack-handed, kind of really ugly. It's shot in a very ugly way and composed in a very dumb, unpleasant, kind of oversaturated way. And I think there's a play within a play. There's Thyrestes. There's a staging of Thyrestes within this, which is takes up about 15-20 minutes of the film, which is actually extraordinary and really good. But it was produced, I believe, by someone else and written by someone else. And it sits within this film, and that was actually quite fun with it, a lot more confident and.
So the only good bit in it was actually stolen from some other.
Yeah, it's just the play within a play. So that bit, all the surrounding fat. But I actually fell asleep during this film and then walked out early. But there was so many. I also kind of it just kind of destroyed the poetry of Seneca's death in a way. And Seneca was a sort of incorrigible and quite highly criticized figure in his time for being very duplicitous. And what happened with Seneca's suicide is that he opened his veins and climbed into a hot bath, and that was to help the blood to sort of more easily leave his body, whatever. But the line he said was
very
devastatingly
communicated there.
Very devastating, and what he allegedly said is he didn't want to let on his fear, and he was trembling the whole time. So that's initially why he asked for the bath. He said he felt cold, but he was really trembling from fear. So there's these moments, but he isn't allowed that. He's actually in this. He's this whining, pathetic man who has to be forcibly thrown into the bath by this legionary, and it kind of distorts the source material in really uninteresting way. In really uninteresting ways. It's fine to disrupt source material, of course, but the bit that really should have been retained, it's very emotionally impactful event full of poetry is kind of just disemboweled completely. And it's a really stupid film. I hated it immensely.
Fantastic. Let's move on.
Let's move on. It's enough. Let's put that in the bin.
The last film that we're going to discuss on this bumper pack of film reviews is Past Lives by Celine Song. It shouldn't overshadow our review too much to say that this is an A24 I think production and distribution, because it's not the typical A24 release, but it does have some of the kind of sensibilities, politically perhaps, of that house, of that production house, distribution house.
Yeah.
The plot summary, I'll just quickly run through it. Past Lives. It's called Past Lives because it refers to this Korean idea that people have met in past lives. People who don't know each other in this life have met in past lives, or have a person, are in yun, this phrase, are in some kind of association. It seems quite vague, or maybe I just didn't listen very well, but it's always possible. But the protagonist is this woman who, as a young girl, was taken by her parents, ambitious parents who emigrated from Korea to Canada, to Toronto, and she seems at the time quite keen on the idea. She's doing very well in her literature class, and she wants to be a writer. And she justifies the departure by saying that Koreans don't win the Nobel Prize for Literature, so she wants to go to the West and be a great writer. And the only real hitch to this great story is that she's leaving behind her close friend and confidant. I mean, they are both very young at this point, maybe 7 or 8. I don't know.
I think so.
This young boy, I'm not going to remember anyone's name, but yeah. This young boy from Korea, and 12 years later, she's given herself an English name. She lives in New York. She's moved to New York. She's become a kind of quite an established-ish young writer.
She's on the up.
She's a
favorite new poet.
And then at a residency that she's on, a writing residency, she meets a kind of a modest and affable Jewish. He's fond of referring to his Jewishness frequently. Jewish man. I can't remember his name either.
I can't remember.
It's a totally race blind forgetting of names on this
Ralph
podcast.
doesn't see names or proper nouns.
Anything. I just see cinema.
Yeah.
But yes, and then so they get together, she gets into communication with.
You've missed the lines.
So before she meets the guy, she's curious about this boy that she was friends with, and she goes on Facebook and asks one of the older people in the community, or the father or something. She realizes that he's been trying to get into contact with her, and then they have a sort of month or so of kind of incessant Zoom calls, or they would Skype in those days. All done very accurately and sort of painfully, sort of evocative of that particular technological era. But they eventually decide that this is stupid. They can't.
Well, she kind of calls it. She puts them's the brakes. You know, she says I want to focus on my life in America, not. So really, what the film sets up is the final act where this guy. 12 years later. 12
more years later.
12 years of simp.
Comes
to, basically has been burning this candle for this whole time. He finally comes to America and he claims he's there to
girlfriends have come and gone, but there's one person who's dominated his heart.
He can't shake this woman. So he goes to America and ostensibly he says to her, and I'm going on holiday, so we may as well hang out with her. It turns out he's actually there purely just to hang out with her.
Yeah.
And there's a sort of love triangle in a way where these three people have a kind of tense dinner, and they have this kind of rapprochement, and they do a bit of sightseeing, the girl and the boy.
One thing I quite liked about the film is that it opened with a sort of silent shot of or like a dialogue-free shot of these people with a voiceover from someone else in the bar, kind of saying, "Wonder what these people's relationship."
I actually loved that.
That was really sweet, and that made me think
a really interesting.
That
film.
made me think it would be a better film than it was.
Because, ladies and gentlemen, so I think because it's an A24 production, it does kind of have the worst kind of. Again, I think I would describe it as the kind of Ottolenghi, ficus fiddly fig tree. Matisse print of a film. You know, it's very lovely to look at, and it's very nicely composed. Probably it's just very elegant, and it's so very nice and so very juste. And I think so it has this desiring ambience around it, but not a kind of frothy languor that you'd expect from, you know, a kind of film that's really emotionally charged, because doesn't really feel like there's any chemistry between these two people, actually. Maybe that's the point, because she doesn't really, but it implies there is something really, really profoundly strong there, but inexplicable, which is this Inyon thing, I suppose. But yeah, it's just very by the numbers, really. I think the emotional heft that it was trying to convey through, again, you know, instrument, like programmatic bits of music and so on, were I found very they fell flat for me. And I think there was this sense that one thing that did annoy me, obviously, their kind of sightseeing and their life is in New York, and obviously New York is a place that's so overdetermined by filmic representations and romances. You know, you could think, say, Woody Allen, Manhattan, or whatever. So many such cases. So it's somewhere really oversaturated. So it's like, okay, so why New York? I think it's purely because of that. It's just like, okay, this is the romance place, you know, and it's good to shoot, and we associate romance with New York and film. Yeah. But I think
and writers,
and I think there's just, but again, it's a very bloodless New York. You know, all the Woody Allen film, the desperate love of New York. You know, the use of like Chet Baker maybe and things like that is so powerful. It's such a love affair with the city. Whereas here, it's just like New York has a kind of poster in an Airbnb on an Airbnb wall or something. It's this kind of postcard New York that has no real presence, or it could be Detroit or LA. It could be anywhere in America. But it seems to be like it's saying something through New York, and yet New York wasn't saying anything. It was just, it looked nice. And
there's a kind
the target market probably lives in New York or something. I don't know.
Definitely, there's a cringe bit where they go, her and the Korean lad go, they go on the Staten Island ferry to see the what's it called, Statue of Liberty. Yeah. And what's his chops, Jewish guy, boyfriend, husband. When he hears about this, he's like, "Oh, I've never been there," you know, in the same way that you and I have never done the London Eye. And she says, "Oh, I'm sure we've gone there together, haven't we?" And it's sort of like, you know, like really obviously like not really, you know, like sort of trying to cover over the fact that there's this secret bond that her and this guy from back home share, and also the political significance of the Statue of Liberty, that it's like
the first thing immigrants see.
Yeah. Obviously, when the area of the plane, it isn't, but you know, it's this symbolic of American freedom and of her, and in a sense, maybe she's shown him the Statue of Liberty to kind of try and give her some insight into like
it's a very generous reading of
the
that
idea. It's not generous. It's I think it's
heavy-handed.
I think it's fucking heavy-handed. Yeah. I think it's exactly why this film will be on Obama's end of year list, because it is a film that tries to it's to sort of espouse this idea that's under threat from the right, obviously, of a kind of liberal American dream.
Yeah, you're right.
Liberal,
it really is
a liberal. I won't say globalist, because that's become very reactionary, but an open to the world American dream. You know, that highlights the simple fact that America is constructed. Almost entirely of
so
immigrants.
Telling that as well. You're so right about that. This kind of this particular glossy image of celebrating liberal America and its institutions, and I think it's very, very telling that all of these characters come from the kind of professional and creative classes. Her parents, an artist and a filmmaker. She's a writer, and the man she was dating when she was younger in Korea is an engineer, successful, wealthy engineer. So there's this kind of invocation that, you know, it's not the sly people slipping over the border in the South. These are the grand tradition of America. You know, sort of people coming with their professional degrees and their creativity to America,
which is fine. I think people.
I'm not denying that happening, but it's very
people
much
should migrate if they want to. But
100%. I'm not unveiling against immigration, but I am saying it's, you know, as you said, it does celebrate this particular kind of liberal, laudatory liberal,
the good migrants,
the good story about migration to America, and how it sets, I suppose, in rejecting him, she's rejecting Korea.
But it all, yeah,
that's
and
kind of what it's saying.
but she doesn't. She sort of holds a candle for him in a way that sort of satisfies no one, and that's fine. Like life is like that, and people feel ambivalent about, you know, there's always a one that got away, you know, in romance quite often. That's totally, I get that. But the fact that it's overcoded with this particular idea about her, there are obviously lots of bits where she speaks in Korean to him, and then the boyfriend he's trying to learn Korean to understand what she says in her sleep, because apparently she talks in her sleep in Korean, and he tries to speak to this guy in Korean, but obviously his Korean is not that good, because it's a very hard language to learn as an Anglophone, I assume. And also he it's a puff piece for two things. It's a puff piece for the idea that, you know, jealousy is immature, and that we should all handle things like adults. I heard that in the press conference, the guy that plays the kind of cuck, essentially, he's saying, you know, I was really proud of the fact that we showed these men, you know, speaking with admiration of each other in a situation that's usually, you know, can often be shown with resentment. I mean, I thought this was insane. I was hoping this performance would highlight the suppressed rage that he would obviously be feeling at her wife not loving him.
The tensions between these people, you know, he can't compete. It's a great Romeric setup. These kind of different longings and desires, and people trying to impose their will on each other.
It's a complete denial of the emotional truth of that situation. I'm sorry, it just is like that's like,
because he's so understanding, this boyfriend. This film is actually it's basically, this is what you show your girlfriend before suggesting having an open relationship.
But it's also a puff, you know. It's a puff piece for this I find very irritating sort of liberal identity notion around you know, that everyone should everyone who has a sort of identity that they can, a past identity they can fall back on, should seek to sort of invoke it humorously as often as possible. Even the Jewish,
he's like Korean.
Yeah, he's Korean, and then this woman is like, and this woman is like, like feeling like needing to constantly convey her melancholy at, you know, being from a different place, which is just in my mind really tedious, because she is obviously
longing for home is a real emotional feeling.
It's a real feeling that
experience,
but it didn't convey it in a way that made me feel anything to do with, I mean, obviously I've lived in London all my life, but I should be able to, it shouldn't be limited, the feeling that's being conveyed shouldn't be limited only to people who have a comparable experience. It should convey the melancholy of this situation in a way that transcends personal experience.
I also feel like I don't want to kind of like speak on matters I don't really know about, but it feels as well like, you know, she's from a successful, wealthy family. It's not like the homeland is shut off for her forever. There's also a very established Korean emigre, you know, community, immigrant community in America, very established.
We don't meet any of her friends.
We don't meet any of her friends. She seems not to really keep the company of really anyone apart from her husband. And it's not like South Korea is closed off for her in any way. That feels like a self-imposed thing that I want to embrace America. And, you know, she can surely afford to travel back. She mentions that she's traveled back there at some point, you know. So I think there's a certain kind of, it implies this like great, this huge fundament of finality in this film, and I don't think it's it seems to be overplaying, it's over exaggerating for effect.
And yet it doesn't have any of the nuance or restraint it clearly thinks it's having, and also it's just cast badly. I mean, and the acting, the guys just don't convey any of the last. I mean, you don't get a sense that you don't get any sense other than this guy being Korean. You don't get any, and this like thing that happened. I mean, what are they supposed to? Are they thinking about? Are they like jacking off to the memory of like when they were walking down the road as 7-year-olds? I mean, what is this romantic attachment that's emerged?
There's no erotic, there's no chemistry there.
The audience is not brought, is not given any real reason to believe that relationship. No doubt this film will be released and will be lauded because it tells a certain story and represents certain things and has nice blinky blonky piano music that makes you,
and looks very nice.
Have a sad face.
This is a film that puts its coasters out, you know, for guests. I think this is there is a sense where there was no frisson of erotically charged encounters between them, and there's a moment where at the end of the film he's waiting for his taxi, and it might be the last time they see each other in a way, and they kind of stare at each other silently, and there's nothing between them there for me. It felt like a complete blankness between them, whereas that scene should have felt so tense with sublimated, erotic or desiring energy, but it just wasn't there. I didn't feel that this was really a film of desire. It was superficially desirable. It's a desirable film, not a desiring film, I think. That would be the distinction I'd make. But yeah, so...
And everyone in the audience seemed to fucking love that shit, man. It was so...
They loved it when she talked about...
It was probably that and Ingeborg Bachman was like a real low point for me in Berlinale.
We've had
as I said, our kind of moods have been quite... because of the lack of sleep, our moods have been quite volatile.
Yeah.
And I definitely...
Well, I am really optimistic because you've seen Passages that excites me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also going to see Allensworth tonight, which is a new James Benning film, and James Benning is always extraordinary, I think. I'm going to also see that tomorrow, so that's definitely we will
on the
talk
agenda.
about that in the next podcast, whether we release that while we're in Berlin or when we get back to London.
Also, I'll be seeing Spirit of the Beehive tonight by Victoria Ricci, but I won't be talking about that because that's retrospective and whatever. But we will also be talking about music by Angela Shanalek.
Mm-hmm.
And we will be talking possibly about Home Invasion and possibly about Infinity Pool and almost certainly, unfortunately, about the new Hong Sang-soo film. Well, that's quite short.
Are you seeing that?
I am seeing it very late
that's tomorrow night at 10:15.
And A Fire, Rotter Himmel by
Christian Petzold.
Christian Pet Cemetery. So we've got...
I think there's
got
a
full docket.
There's a few things here that I think could be interesting to talk about. I think so. I think we've screwed the pooch with some screenings. I think the Hong Sang-soo, actually, despite all of my kind of all of my I don't get it about Hong Sang-soo and my kind of dislike of Hong Sang-soo, I think this one sounds structurally formally interesting because it's shot all out of focus.
Yeah, gives us something
like
to
a kind of
engage
richer blur painting vibe. So I'm kind of interested in that. But yeah, so we're now in the last leg of our dalliance in Berlin. I'm kind of... I just want a proper meal, Ralph.
It's been intense, and there's more to come. But yes, so there will be a part 3 somehow, possibly remotely. Yes.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen. Pet. Sold.
Yes.